Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than what I usually do because this is actually the final project for my short story class at college. The story that I'm going to be looking at today is called Flying Carpets by Stephen Millhauser. It is from The Story and Its Writer, an introduction to short fiction, edited by Ann Charters, which is the particular book that I am reading for my course this semester. The story is really interesting and I picked it because I'm very fascinated with magical realism, which is a big topic that we talked about in my class as part of the postmodernist period. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, is an example of magical realism, and magical realism I feel definitely takes hold in Flying Carpets. Before I kind of get into the nitty-gritty details of the story, I would like to give you guys a little bit of background on Stephen Millhauser himself. Stephen Millhauser was born in 1943 and grew up in Brooklyn, New York until the age of 4 when he moved to Stratford, Connecticut. Both of his parents were teachers, and he basically said he came from a working class neighborhood. Stephen Millhauser is known for his love of short fiction and novella. He's also known for depicting the pastoral sense of American small towns, and he feels like short fiction really captures those moments that make them so interesting and intimate for readers. Something else I found interesting about Stephen Millhauser is that he eventually went to go get his BA at Columbia University, but when he went to go get his doctorate, he dropped out, which I thought was really fascinating because I wanted to figure out how that sort of came to play in the story. The story itself is about a young boy who lives, I'm assuming, in sort of this Connecticut town with a working class neighborhood. The story opens up where the main character, who I assume presumably is quite young, is reminiscing on the idea of how summers as a child really just drag on. And because summers as a small child tend to drag on, there is a serious lack of entertainment for small children like the narrator. It was very interesting how intimately familiar the narrator was with his surroundings. You really get the sense that this whole setting is very tried and true for him. You also get these repeat images of the swing set, of the chicken coop, of his neighbor. He's kind of done it all. He's played on the swing set, he's played with frogs, and he's kind of bored. At this point we kind of enter into the realm of magical realism because his father comes home one day and gives him a flying carpet. The way that this is treated is so normal in the same way that a father would gift his son a wiffle ball bat. He just hands over the carpet, and then the boy is described as just starting to sort of get in the swing of it by sitting on it and playing with the edges and kind of moving up a little bit in the air and then coming back down, sort of testing his limits in the same way that a kid would kind of ride a bike. See how he sort of is very competitive with his neighbor about who can go the highest and kind of being jealous of the other kids in the neighborhood who are all getting these flying carpets and sort of trying to figure out how high they can actually go. You really get the sense that the writer wants you to feel like this is a real thing, that this is a coming of age thing, that kids just get flying carpets and that they just test them out until they fly too high, which happens to our narrator soon in the story. The story is only 5 pages, so it's a very short amount of time to tell the story, but like I've already mentioned, that's kind of Millhauser's style. What the narrator ends up doing is one night going so far that he even starts to question his own existence. He says, "He was vanishing into blue. Below my carpet I saw only blue. In this blue beyond blue, all nothing everywhere, was I still I?" So this is very sudden shift in tone and narration. At this point he kind of just loses himself, and then he describes sort of just falling into the blue, and all of a sudden he's back on the ground and he says, "There was Joey's yard, there was my garden, there is my chicken coop, my swing, and landing in the yard I felt the weight of the earth streaming up through me like a burst of joy." So essentially he's very happy to be home. We kind of flash forward and we see that Flying Carpet is now in the basement. It's been forgotten and he has moved on to something completely different. In this small space in this story, the narrator is really the only character that you get a lot of insight into. The mother is there, the father is there. So I really started to consider this character's psychology, and so I decided to look at the story from a psychological perspective. So I decided to do some research into the psychological field, and I came up with some very interesting ideas about what the story can mean through a psychological perspective, and basically came up with 2 different theories that I think sort of ties in with the character's story. I find that when looking at the character in relation to the other characters in the story, there's the mother and there's the father, and I find that the character definitely has more of an attachment to his mother. So the mother is described as sort of watching him from out the window go on his flying carpet as he sort of explores this new world. And then at one point before his like crazy journey into the vast blue, he says, "I want to call it after her. Stop, make me go with you," almost like a child. And so I thought this was really interesting, and so I tried to look for theories that kind of had to do with children and their mother, and children having a hard time sort of leaving the nest and then kind of returning to it, which is really interesting in context with Stephen Millhauser, who dropped out of college and moved home with his parents for some time and felt very conflicted about it. So I decided to look at Mary Ainsworth's strange situation procedure, developed as an extension of the attachment theory, which is basically a procedure that was given to children where children were placed in a room and in the company of their caregiver in a strange environment. And so I kind of looked at the story through this lens, and I was like, okay, so the character is there, the mother is there, and the strange environment is sort of being given the opportunity to go on this flying carpet into sort of a new realm that's absent from his everyday. In the strange situation procedure, the individual, the child, is left completely on its own. The caregiver leaves, so the mother leaves, and we see that at one point when the mother leaves the house and he's kind of reaching out and being like, "Please stay with me," and she goes anyways, he is now by himself. So before, his mother was there and sort of watching over him, which is what happens in the first stages of the strange situation procedure. But in the following stages, the mother leaves. So when the mother leaves, she's not watching him anymore as he goes on his flying carpet, and now he's left to his own devices. In the final stages of the strange situation procedure, we see the mother return. Based on the way that the child interacts with the mother, we see sort of how strong their attachment is. So then if we look at it in context with the story, I already told you how he came back, he felt like he was in a burst of joy. So that is when the mother is there. And then you see later on him explained as, "In the afternoon, I stood behind my mother on an escalator leading up to Boys' Pants. School was less than 2 weeks away. I had outgrown everything. Grandma was coming up for a visit," and then basically you see that everything has returned to normal. So in a way, the strange situation procedure really applies in the context of the story, because you see the initial character trying something new, like in the strange situation procedure, only to be left to his own devices, where his mother is not there anymore, and then eventually the mother returns, and based on the way that those two interact, you see how truly strong the mother and child attachment is, which in this case is very strong. So I looked a little bit further to try to consider what other theories could tie into this, especially considering Stephen Millhauser as an adult. And the other theory that I found is called the failure to launch theory, which is a movie with Sarah Jessica Parker, but it's also a real psychological theory. It says, "When adults struggle to function independently and overwhelmed by the demands of adulthood, frequently suffer shame and alienation, as same-age peers accumulate accomplishments while they accrue increasing disability." So the part that stuck out to me was the idea of their peers accumulating accomplishments, because you do see the narrator constantly jealous of his neighbor who's going higher than them, and then there's that boy where he returns to his journey and sees him going higher than him. And so you kind of see how, even though this character, we don't really know his age exactly, but he is construed as young. But if you kind of look at it on a larger scale, like what does this mean for the character moving forward, we see that he has a strong attachment with his mother. And then we look at this failure to launch theory, and basically the failure to launch theory says that the reason why people fail to launch is because they just have struggle being independent, and in return become alienated with their family, which basically is what happens to our narrator at the end of the story. In the end, even though he's going back to school, you get the sense that things are moving forward. There's this ominous feeling that, okay, he's very close to his mother, that's great, but in the future, this failure to launch theory, what could that mean for him? And if we think about it in context with Stephen Millhauser's actual life, when he went to college and came back, it makes it more poignant than ever. Overall, readers get the sense the central conflict does lie in the fact that the narrator falls short of sort of reaching for these big heights in his life and ultimately comes back to being at home. I used this psychological perspective because I thought it was a good way of grounding the magic realist elements in the story, and ultimately it provided me a better sense of who the character was, and also kind of who Stephen Millhauser was himself, and how the things that happened in his life as a person coming home from college back home to his parents impacted his narrative work as a whole. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you'd enjoy this video. If you want to see more analytical analysis like this in the future, go ahead and let me know. I hope you guys are enjoying your December, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!